I never thought I'd find myself arguing with my own son about where I could eat dinner in my own home, yet here I was, standing in the doorway of the formal dining room with a plate of food in my hand, while my daughter-in-law Victoria looked at me like I was tracking mud across her pristine floors. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Richard, I've explained this before, Victoria said with that practiced patience she reserved for me. When we have guests, family meals are taken in the kitchen. My son James avoided my eyes, suddenly very interested in straightening his silverware. The guests were Victoria's parents, who visited every Sunday like clockwork, and apparently outranked me in the household hierarchy. They sat at my mahogany table, the one I'd purchased 30 years ago when this house was new, looking uncomfortable but not intervening. I understand, I said quietly, my 73 years having taught me when battles were worth fighting. I turned and walked back toward the kitchen, my dinner growing cold. This had become my new normal ever since James and Victoria had moved into my home 6 months ago. What started as a temporary arrangement while they renovated their house had evolved into something else entirely, something that felt increasingly permanent with each passing day. The kitchen wasn't terrible, of course. It was spacious and warm, with a cozy breakfast nook overlooking the garden I'd tended for decades. But sitting there alone while family ate in the dining room felt like a deliberate message. I was staff now, not family. As I settled at the kitchen counter, I could hear Victoria laughing, that musical sound she produced for company. Through the doorway, I watched her refill her father's wine glass with the bottle from my cellar. The good bottle. The one Margaret and I had been saving for our 50th anniversary, before cancer made that impossible. The painful irony wasn't lost on me. This was my house. Every brick, every board, every fixture paid for through 40 years of teaching high school physics. Margaret and I had saved, sacrificed, and planned to create this home. Now I was relegated to eating in the kitchen like a Victorian-era servant. James appeared in the doorway, guilt evident on his face. He was a good man at heart, my son, but he'd always been susceptible to stronger personalities. And Victoria had personality in spades. "Dad," he began, voice low. "It's just easier this way. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us." Now back to the story. "Easier for whom?" I asked, not unkindly. The question hung in the air between us. "Victoria feels the dining room should be kept formal for guests," he explained, as if reciting lines he'd rehearsed. "It's important to her." I nodded slowly. "And what's important to you, James?" His eyes flicked away from mine. "Peace," he said finally. "Peace in the house." After he returned to the dining room, I finished my meal in silence. Through the window, I could see the garden beginning to need attention again. The roses Margaret planted were starting to show their age, much like myself. Things that are neglected eventually show their neglect. It's an inescapable truth of both gardens and relationships. That night, I retired to my bedroom, now the only space in the house that felt truly mine, and pulled out the leather portfolio I kept in my bedside drawer. Inside were documents I hadn't looked at in years, the deed to the house, insurance papers, and my will. I spread them across the bed, yellow lamplight, making the official stamps and signatures look almost ceremonial. The deed was clear: Richard Allen Winters, sole owner. After Margaret passed, I had considered downsizing but could never bring myself to leave the home we had built together. Every corner held memories. The height marks on the kitchen doorframe tracking James's growth. The dent in the living room wall from when Margaret tried to rearrange furniture while I was at a teachers' conference. As I tucked the papers away, my phone buzzed with a message from my old friend and attorney, Bernard. We'd been playing chess online every Tuesday for years. "Ready to lose again tomorrow?" his message read. For the first time in weeks, I smiled. An idea was beginning to take shape in my mind. The following morning, I made breakfast before anyone else was awake, a habit from 40 years of teaching. The kitchen was peaceful at 6 a.m., the light gentle as it filtered through the east windows. This had been Margaret's favorite time of day. "The world hasn't had a chance to complicate itself yet," she used to say. Victoria appeared at 7:30, already dressed in one of her impeccable business suits, her hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. She paused when she saw me at the table. "You're up early," she observed, moving efficiently to prepare her smoothie with ingredients she'd labeled and organized in my refrigerator. "Old habits," I replied, folding my newspaper. "I thought I might do some gardening today." She frowned slightly. "Actually, I've arranged for landscapers to come this afternoon. The garden needs a professional touch. And we're having the Andersons over this weekend, James's new boss and his wife." I felt something in me go very still. "The garden doesn't need landscapers. It needs care." "Richard," she sighed, using my name the way one might address a stubborn child. "The property values in this neighborhood are exceptional. We can't have the yard looking, well, let's say eclectic. The Homeowners Association has standards." "The Homeowners Association?" I repeated quietly. "And when did we join that?" "Last month," she said, not looking up from her phone. "The paperwork should have been in that stack I left for you. Didn't you sign it?" I had indeed signed several documents Victoria had presented, mostly related to utilities and services. I remembered her explanation. "Just updating accounts to include our names for when you're traveling." It had seemed reasonable at the time. "I must have missed that particular paper," I said carefully. She waved dismissively. "Well, it's all handled now. The neighborhood is finally establishing some proper guidelines. Property values should increase significantly." James shuffled in, already in his tie despite the dark circles under his eyes. He kissed Victoria's cheek and gave me a distracted "morning, Dad" before pouring coffee. "I was just telling your father about the landscapers," Victoria said, sliding a protein bar toward him. "Oh, right," James nodded. "It'll look great, Dad. Very modern, clean lines." "Like Margaret's roses need clean lines," I muttered. Victoria's phone chimed, saving her from responding. "That's my reminder. We have that dinner with the Kaplans tonight, James? 7 o'clock. "Tonight?" James frowned. "I thought that was next week." "No, it's tonight. I've laid out your blue suit." She turned to me. "Richard, you'll be all right on your own for dinner?" It wasn't a question that required an answer, so I didn't give one. After they left for work, I sat alone in the silent kitchen, thinking. Then I called Bernard. "Richard?" Bernard's voice boomed through the phone. "Ready to lose another chess match?" "Actually, I need some legal advice," I said. There was a pause. "Official capacity advice or friend advice?" "Both," I replied. "Can I come to your office today?" Bernard's office was downtown in a converted Victorian that had housed the same law firm for over 70 years. The wood paneling and leather chairs were worn but dignified, much like Bernard himself. At 68, he still worked full-time, though he often joked that it was mostly to escape his wife's health food regimen. "So," he said after I'd explained my situation, leaning back in his chair, "the short version is that your son and his wife have essentially taken over your home, relegated you to the kitchen for meals when they have company, and may have signed you up for an HOA without proper consent. Put so plainly it sounded absurd. That about covers it." Bernard removed his glasses, polishing them thoughtfully. "And you're still the sole owner of the property? No changes to the deed or mortgage?" "None that I authorized," I confirmed. "Good," he nodded. "That simplifies things." He leaned forward. "Richard, what exactly do you want to happen here? Do you want them out of your house?" I considered this carefully. I don't want James out of my life. But I want respect in my own home. I want them to understand that their convenience doesn't trump my dignity. Bernard smiled slowly. "Then I have a suggestion that might accomplish exactly that." 3 days later, I sat at my kitchen counter, eating a sandwich, and watching the landscapers Victoria had hired tear out Margaret's rosebushes. Each shovelful of soil felt like a physical pain. 40 years of memories being ripped out because they didn't fit Victoria's aesthetic vision. I was surprised by my own calm, perhaps because I knew what was coming. That evening, while Victoria was finalizing arrangements for a dinner party she'd planned for the weekend, the doorbell rang. James was still at work, often staying late these days. I wondered if the office was more comfortable for him than his increasingly tense home. "Can you get that, Richard?" Victoria called from the dining room, where she was arranging flowers, store-bought, not garden-grown as Margaret would have done. I opened the door to find Bernard standing there, briefcase in hand, looking every inch the distinguished attorney in his tailored suit. "Mr. Winters," he said formally, eyes twinkling slightly. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all," I replied, matching his tone. "Please come in." Victoria appeared in the foyer, curiosity evident on her face. "Hello," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Victoria Winters, James's wife." "Bernard Kaplan," he introduced himself. "Richard's attorney." Her smile faltered slightly. "Attorney, is everything all right?" "Everything is in perfect order," Bernard assured her. "I just need to review some documents with Mr. Winters regarding his estate." "Of course," she said, recovering quickly. "You can use the study." "Actually," I interjected, "we'll use the dining room. It's more appropriate for formal matters." Victoria hesitated, then nodded. "Of course. I'll bring you gentlemen some coffee." In the dining room, Bernard laid out several folders on the mahogany table, my table, while Victoria brought coffee on a silver tray. Margaret's silver tray. "Will this take long?" Victoria asked. "We're having guests this weekend, and I need to finalize some arrangements." "That rather depends," Bernard said pleasantly, "on how quickly we can address certain concerns that have arisen." "Concerns?" Victoria's perfectly shaped eyebrows drew together. "Yes," I said, opening one of the folders. "For instance, this homeowners' association agreement. I don't recall authorizing this." Victoria's cheeks flushed slightly. "It was in that stack of papers, the utilities and such." I explained all this. "Did you explicitly inform Richard that he was joining an HOA?" Bernard asked, his tone remaining courteous but firm. Well, it was all explained in the papers," she said less certainly now. "I see." Bernard nodded. "And these landscaping changes? Were these discussed with the homeowner?" "Richard doesn't have time to maintain the garden properly anymore," Victoria replied, a defensive edge creeping into her voice. "We're simply helping modernize the property." "By removing the rose bushes his late wife planted," Bernard noted. "Interesting interpretation of helping." Victoria's face hardened. "I don't understand why this requires an attorney. These are family matters." "Precisely why I'm here," Bernard smiled. "Family matters that involve property ownership should be properly documented." The front door opened and closed, and moments later James appeared in the dining room doorway, looking tired and confused. "Dad, what's going on? Who's this?" "James," I said, rising to greet my son. "This is my friend and attorney, Bernard Kaplan. Bernard, my son James." "Your attorney?" James looked between us, frowning. "Is something wrong?" "That's what we're discussing," Bernard replied. "Why don't you join us?" James sat down hesitantly, setting his briefcase aside. Victoria remained standing, arms crossed defensively. "I've asked Bernard to help clarify some things about household arrangements," I explained. "There seems to be some confusion about who makes decisions regarding this property." James shifted uncomfortably. "Dad, if this is about the garden—" "It's about more than the garden," I said quietly. "It's about where I eat when you have guests. It's about HOA agreements signed without my knowledge. It's about being made to feel like a guest in my own home." "That's not fair," Victoria interjected. "We've been managing the household because you shouldn't have to worry about these things at your age." "My age," I repeated. "I'm 73, Victoria, not incapacitated." Bernard cleared his throat. "Perhaps I can help clarify the legal situation." He opened another folder. "This property at 1842 Maple Avenue is solely owned by Richard Winters. No mortgages, no liens, no encumbrances of any kind. All property taxes are paid through the current year." James looked confused. "We know that. Dad's owned this house for decades. "What's your point?" Bernard continued calmly. "My point is that all decisions regarding this property, from landscaping to dining arrangements to HOA memberships, legally require the owner's informed consent." "We've been paying the utilities," Victoria said sharply, "and buying groceries. We've contributed to this household." "Which is appreciated," I acknowledged. "But paying for utilities doesn't transfer ownership rights." "So what are you saying?" James asked, a hint of alarm in his voice. Are you asking us to leave?" "No," I said firmly. "I'm asking to be treated with respect in my own home. I'm asking not to be relegated to the kitchen when you have guests. I'm asking to be consulted about changes to the property I've owned for 40 years. Victoria's face had gone pale. "This is ridiculous. We moved in to help you. The house was becoming too much for you to manage alone." "That wasn't the arrangement we discussed," I reminded her. "You were renovating your house. This was temporary." James looked stricken. "Dad, we sold our house. Victoria didn't tell you? We sold it last month." I stared at my son, genuinely shocked. "You sold your house? Without telling me you intended to stay here permanently?" Victoria cut in. "We got an excellent price. The market was perfect, and it made more sense financially. This house is so large for just one person. And eventually—" She trailed off, but her meaning was clear. "Eventually I would be gone, and the house would be theirs anyway." "I see," I said softly. "So you've been making long-term plans for my property." Bernard slid another document across the table. This might be relevant to the discussion. It was a property valuation for my house. The figure at the bottom made even Victoria's eyes widen. "The neighborhood has appreciated considerably," Bernard explained, "especially properties that aren't bound by restrictive HOA regulations." I looked at my son. "James, do you remember when you were 10 and you broke Mrs. Peterson's window with your baseball?" He blinked at the change of subject. Yes? Do you remember what I made you do?" "You made me go apologize and offer to pay for it with my allowance," he said. "It took me 6 months to pay it off. And do you remember why I insisted on that, even though I could have paid for it easily?" James nodded slowly. "You said actions have consequences, and I needed to learn responsibility." "Exactly," I said. "You're not 10 anymore, but the principle remains the same. Actions have consequences. Choices have impacts." I pulled out my own document, a simple letter I drafted with Bernard's help. This outlines 2 options. Option 1. We establish clear boundaries and expectations for shared living in this house, with explicit recognition of my authority as homeowner. Option 2. I sell the house and purchase a smaller property for myself. You would receive 20% of the proceeds to help with a down payment on your own place. Victoria stared at me in disbelief. "You would sell your home? Margaret's home?" "Margaret's home died when you tore out her roses," I said quietly. "And this hasn't felt like my home since you decided I should eat in the kitchen." The silence that followed was deafening. James looked devastated. Victoria's face was unreadable. "You don't mean this," James finally said. "This is our home too now." "Is it?" I asked. "Because residents of a home generally don't banish other residents to the kitchen during dinner parties." Victoria abruptly sat down, her composure cracking slightly. "You're serious?" "Completely," I confirmed. "I've spent my life teaching young people about actions and consequences. I would be remiss if I didn't apply the same principles to my own family." Bernard cleared his throat. "I should note that Mr. Winters has also updated his will. The previous version left this property to James upon Richard's death. The new version directs that the property be sold, with proceeds divided between James and several educational charities." This was the first Victoria had heard of my original will, judging by her expression. I hadn't told James either, believing that planning your inheritance often changes how people treat you in life. "Dad," James began, his voice strained, "we never meant to make you feel unwelcome. This is your house. We know that." "Do you?" I asked. "Because your actions suggest otherwise." Victoria's eyes had filled with tears, whether from frustration or genuine remorse I couldn't tell. "What exactly do you want from us?" "I want what most people want," I said. "Dignity, respect, consideration. I want to be treated as the homeowner, not as a tolerated guest. I want to eat at my own dining table regardless of who's visiting. I want to be consulted about significant changes to the property. And if we agree to these terms? Victoria asked, her voice tight. Then we start over, I said simply. We find a way to live together that works for everyone. And perhaps we plant new roses. James looked at me with new eyes, seeing his father, perhaps, rather than an aging burden to be managed. Thank you, I said quietly. Would you... He hesitated. Would you be willing to have dinner with me tonight? Just us. There's a new Italian place downtown. I'd like that, I said, surprised and pleased by the invitation. Victoria appeared in the doorway, already dressed for work despite the early hour. She hesitated when she saw us together, then squared her shoulders and entered. Good morning, she said stiffly, moving to the coffee pot. Morning, we both responded. An uncomfortable silence filled the kitchen as Victoria prepared her usual smoothie. James cleared his throat. Victoria, Dad and I are having dinner tonight. Just the two of us. She paused briefly, then continued chopping fruit. Fine, she said shortly. I have calls to make this evening anyway. After she left for work, James sighed. She'll come around. She's just proud. Pride can be an expensive luxury, I remarked. James nodded thoughtfully. I'd better get to the office. See you tonight, Dad. After he left, I sat alone in the kitchen, finishing my coffee and contemplating the turn events had taken. I hadn't expected such quick movement, but perhaps the shock of yesterday's confrontation had been necessary. My phone chimed with a text from Bernard. Chess at 2 p.m.? Your move, as they say. I smiled and typed back, looking forward to it. Later that morning, I decided to visit the garden center. If we were going to plant new roses, I wanted to choose them myself. The young woman at the garden center was helpful, showing me various varieties and discussing the best placements for full sun and good drainage. These are lovely, I said, examining a bush with deep red blooms. Those are veterans, Honor, she explained. They're robust and disease-resistant, with a beautiful fragrance. My late wife would have loved these, I told her. Were you married long? She asked kindly. 46 years, I replied. The roses I'm replacing were hers. Planted them when we first moved into the house. The young woman nodded sympathetically. Then these new ones should be special too, a continuation rather than a replacement. I liked that thought. Continuation rather than replacement. I selected several varieties, including the Veterans, Honor, and arranged for delivery the following day. On my way home, I stopped by my old school. I'd retired 5 years ago, but still occasionally substituted when they needed someone for physics classes. The familiar hallways and the smell of chalk and floor polish brought back decades of memories. Richard! The principal, Sandra Chen, spotted me from her office doorway. What a nice surprise. Just thought I'd stop in and say hello, I explained as she ushered me into her office. We've missed you, she said warmly. The students still talk about Mr. Winter's experiments. No one else has managed to make physics quite as entertaining. We chatted for a while about the school and former colleagues. Then she leaned forward slightly. Actually, I'm glad you came by. Our physics teacher is going on maternity leave next semester. We could use someone experienced to fill in. Would you be interested? Just 3 classes, 3 days a week. The offer surprised me. You know I'm 73, right? I said with a small smile. And still sharper than most of our faculty, she countered. Age is just a number, Richard. Capability is what matters. I promised to think about it, feeling oddly energized by the conversation. On the drive home, I found myself mentally reviewing some of my favorite demonstrations and lectures. The idea of returning to teaching, even temporarily, was appealing. Having a purpose outside the house might be exactly what I needed. When I arrived home, Victoria's car was in the driveway unexpectedly. She was usually at work until evening. I found her in the living room, sitting rigidly on the sofa with her laptop open. You're home early, I observed. She looked up, her expression carefully neutral. I had some research to do. Oh? She gestured to the screen. Property values, rental options. Legal rights of residents versus homeowners. I see, I said, taking a seat in the armchair across from her. Find anything interesting? Several things, she replied. including the fact that after living here for 6 months and establishing residency, James and I would be considered tenants under the law. You can't simply evict us without proper notice and procedure. I nodded. Bernard mentioned something similar, though I never said anything about eviction. You threatened to sell the house, she pointed out. I presented options. I corrected. There's a difference. Victoria closed her laptop with a decisive snap. Richard, let's be honest with each other. You've never approved of me. You've always thought I wasn't good enough for James. The accusation startled me. That's not true, isn't it? She challenged. You've always seen me as too ambitious, too focused on appearances. I considered her words carefully. I've always seen you as different from our family. Not wrong, just different. We value different things. Like what? Like authenticity over appearance. Like substance over status. She flinched slightly. And you think I lack substance? I think, I said slowly, that you're so focused on creating the perfect image that you sometimes forget what's beneath it. Victoria was silent for a moment, her fingers tracing the edge of her laptop. My parents grew up with nothing, she finally said, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. My father worked 3 jobs to put himself through college. My mother wore the same dress to every special occasion for years. They promised themselves their children would never know that kind of struggle. This was a side of Victoria I'd never seen, vulnerable, almost raw. They taught me that appearance matters, she continued. That how others perceive you can determine your opportunities. That to succeed you need to look successful first. And that's why the HOA, the landscaping, the formal dining room are so important to you. I realized aloud. She nodded. I know it seems superficial to you, but to me it's protection. Against what? Against going backward, she admitted. Against losing what we've worked for. For the first time, I felt I was seeing the real Victoria beneath the perfect exterior. It didn't excuse her behavior, but it helped me understand it. I can respect your desire for security, I said carefully, but not when it comes at the expense of others' dignity. She was quiet for a long moment. I never intended to make you feel diminished. Intentions and impact are often different, I observed. Victoria nodded slowly. James told me about your dinner plans tonight. Yes, I confirmed. Just father and son. That's good, she said, sounding slightly uncertain. He needs that. After an awkward silence, she spoke again. I have a proposal. I'm listening. Give us 3 months, she said. 3 months to find a suitable place and arrange a move that doesn't disrupt James's career momentum. In the meantime, we'll respect your position as homeowner. No more changes without consultation. No more. Kitchen banishment. I considered her offer. And after 3 months? If we haven't found something by then, we'll revisit the conversation, she said. Maybe consider a formal rental agreement with clearly defined boundaries. It was reasonable, more reasonable than I'd expected from her. I think that could work. I agreed. And Victoria? Yes. I ordered new roses today. They'll be delivered tomorrow. I'd like to plant them where Margaret's were. She hesitated, then nodded. Of course. It's your garden. That evening, James picked me up for dinner in his car, which felt oddly formal after months of living together. The Italian restaurant was small and intimate, with checkered tablecloths and candles in wax-covered Chianti bottles. I spoke with Victoria today. I told him as we studied our menus. I know, he said. She told me about your conversation. And your agreement. 3 months is reasonable, I said. James set his menu down. Dad, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest. Always, I promised. Do you think I've changed since marrying Victoria? I took a sip of water, considering my response carefully. Yes, I said finally. You've become more accommodating, less certain of your own wants and needs. He nodded slowly, not arguing the point. I think you're right. Somewhere along the way, I started believing that peace was worth any price, even if that price was my own voice. Peace is valuable, I acknowledged, but so is authenticity. Victoria and I talked for a long time this afternoon, he said. Really talked. Maybe for the first time in years. She admitted some things. I admitted some things. It was uncomfortable, but necessary. The best conversations often are. I observed. Our food arrived, and we ate in companionable silence for a while. I've been offered a teaching position, I told him, substituting for a physics teacher on maternity leave next semester. That's great, Dad. James looked genuinely pleased. Are you going to take it? I'm considering it, I said. It would be good to have a purpose again. To feel useful. You don't need to be useful to have value, James said quietly. That's something I've been thinking about lately. We're human beings, not human doings. When did you get so philosophical? I asked with a smile. I had a good teacher, he replied, raising his glass in a small toast to me. The next day, the roses were delivered as promised. I was examining them in the driveway when Victoria arrived home from work. She pulled up alongside me and got out, eyeing the plants curiously. These are the new roses? She asked. Yes, I confirmed. 5 varieties. They should provide blooms from early spring through late fall. She knelt down to look at them more closely. They're beautiful. This red one is stunning. Veterans honor, I told her. For Margaret. She always loved deep red roses. Victoria touched one of the leaves gently. I never knew your wife. What was she like? The question surprised me. In all the years James had been with Victoria, she'd shown little interest in Margaret. She was extraordinary, I said simply. Brilliant, but humble. Kind, but fiercely principled. She could make anyone feel at ease, but would never sacrifice her values for approval. Victoria nodded thoughtfully. James has her smile. I've seen it in the old photographs. Yes, I agreed, he does. She stood, brushing soil from her knees. Would you like help planting these? Again, she surprised me. You don't have to do that. I know, she said, but I'd like to. Then yes, I said. I'd appreciate the help. We spent the next hour digging holes and carefully transplanting the roses, working mostly in silence. It was strange to see Victoria, usually so immaculately groomed, with dirt on her hands and a smudge on her cheek. You know, she said as we watered the newly planted bushes, my grandmother used to grow roses. I'd forgotten that until today. She had a tiny garden behind her apartment building. Memory is funny that way, I commented, often triggered by unexpected things. She nodded. I used to help her deadhead the spent blooms. She told me it was like giving the plant permission to begin again. Wise woman, I said. Beginnings often require endings first. Victoria looked at me thoughtfully. Is that what yesterday was? An ending to make way for a beginning? Perhaps, I replied, though I prefer to think of it as a course correction. We finished watering in silence. As we gathered the tools, Victoria said quietly, I'm sorry about the dining room thing. It was petty. Apology accepted, I said simply. That evening, when Victoria's parents arrived for their usual Sunday dinner visit, I noticed something different. The dining room table was set for 5, not 4. Victoria approached me as I was reading in the living room. Dinner's almost ready, she said. We're eating in the dining room, all of us together. Her parents were clearly confused by the new dynamic, but adapted quickly. Over dinner, Victoria's father, Harold, turned to me. Victoria tells us you used to teach physics, he said. That must have been fascinating work. Still is, I replied. In fact, I'm considering taking a temporary position next semester. At your age, Victoria's mother, Eleanor, looked shocked. Surely it's time to relax and enjoy retirement. Mom, Victoria interrupted gently but firmly. Richard is perfectly capable of deciding what he wants to do with his time. Eleanor looked taken aback but said nothing further. After dinner, James and I cleared the table while Victoria showed her parents the newly planted roses in the twilight. Through the window, I could see her gesturing animatedly, likely explaining the varieties and their care requirements. That went better than expected, James observed as we loaded the dishwasher. Progress, I agreed. Not perfection, but progress. 3 months will go quickly, he said. Victoria's already contacted a realtor. We're going to look at some properties this weekend. No rush, I said, surprised to find I meant it. As long as we understand each other, we can make this work temporarily. James smiled. You know, Dad, I think yesterday might have been the best thing that could have happened to all of us. How so? It forced us to be honest. With you, with each other, with ourselves. He closed the dishwasher and started it. Victoria and I have had more real conversations in the last 24 hours than in the past year. Sometimes a shock to the system is necessary, I observed. Later that night, as I prepared for bed, I heard a soft knock at my door. Opening it, I found Victoria standing there, holding a leather-bound book. Sorry to disturb you, she said. But I found this while organizing some shelves in the study. I thought you might want it. She handed me the book. It was Margaret's journal, the one she'd kept during her final year. I'd looked for it after her death, but never found it. Thank you, I said, genuinely moved. Where was it? Quote, behind some legal books on the top shelf, Victoria explained. It must have been misplaced during cleaning. I held the journal carefully, feeling its weight, the weight of Margaret's final thoughts. Richard, Victoria said hesitantly, I want you to know that I'm trying. This isn't easy for me, but I'm trying. I know, I said. That's all any of us can do. After she left, I sat on the edge of my bed and carefully opened the journal to the last entry, dated just a week before Margaret died. Told Richard today to plant new roses when these ones fade. Life is about renewal, not preservation. My greatest hope is that he'll find ways to keep growing, even when I'm gone. That this house will remain a home, not a museum to what was. I closed the journal, tears blurring my vision. Even now, years later, Margaret was still teaching me how to live. I fell asleep that night with the journal beside me, feeling a peace I hadn't experienced in months. The battle had been uncomfortable, even painful, but necessary. Like deadheading roses to allow for new blooms, the mansion was still mine, not just legally, but in the ways that truly mattered. And perhaps, in time, it could become something new. Not just my home or James and Victoria's temporary residence, but a place where 3 adults could coexist with mutual respect and understanding. It wasn't the ending I'd expected when I confronted them, but maybe it was better. Not an ending at all, but a continuation, with dignity intact for all of us. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen window, casting a warm glow on the table where I sat with my coffee and Margaret's journal. I'd spent much of the night reading her final entries, finding wisdom and comfort in her words. One passage in particular had stayed with me. The greatest gift we can give those we love is the freedom to grow into themselves, even when that growth takes them in directions we hadn't expected. I was still pondering this when James entered, already dressed for work despite the early hour. "Morning, Dad," he said, pouring himself coffee. "You're up early." "Old habits," I replied with a small smile. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in weeks, actually," he admitted, joining me at the table. Victoria and I talked until late. Really talked. "That sounds promising." He nodded, stirring his coffee thoughtfully. "We're seeing a property this afternoon. Victorian style, needs work but has potential. Like a metaphor for a marriage." I observed. James looked up, surprised, then laughed. I hadn't thought of it that way, but you're right. The sound of his laughter, genuine and unguarded, was like music. I couldn't remember the last time I'd heard it. I found Margaret's journal, I told him, touching the leather cover gently. Victoria discovered it yesterday. Mom's journal? His eyes widened. I remember her writing in it, but I didn't know it still existed. Would you like to read it sometime? He hesitated. Are you sure? It seems so personal. Your mother would have wanted you to read it, I said confidently. She believed wisdom should be shared, not hoarded. James nodded, visibly moved. I'd like that. Thank you. After he left for work, I decided to visit the university where I'd taught physics before moving to the high school. My former department chair, Dr. Elena Patel, had been asking me to guest lecture for years. Perhaps it was time to consider her offer. The campus had changed dramatically since my time there. New buildings, new technology, but the physics department still occupied the same wing of the science building, with the same faint smell of ozone and chalk dust. Elena's office door was open, her desk covered with papers in organized chaos. At 62, she remained as energetic and sharp as ever, her silver hair cut in a practical bob. "Richard!" She looked up with genuine delight. "What a marvelous surprise!" "Hello, Elena," I greeted her. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Nothing that can't wait," she assured me, clearing a stack of journals from a chair. "Sit, sit! What brings you to my cluttered domain?" "I've been thinking about your guest lecture invitation," I said, settling into the chair. Her eyes brightened. "Has retirement finally become boring?" "Not boring," I corrected. "Just incomplete. The curse of the lifelong educator." She nodded sagely. "We never quite stop teaching, even when we leave the classroom." We talked for nearly an hour, discussing potential lecture topics and scheduling. Elena's enthusiasm was contagious, reminding me why I'd loved academia for so many years. "I have a graduate seminar on quantum mechanics this fall," she said. "They would benefit enormously from your perspective on the historical development of the field. You lived through some of the most significant discoveries." "You make me sound like a relic," I laughed. "A living historical resource?" She corrected with a smile. "Experience is an invaluable teacher, Richard. Your students always understood that. It's why they adored you." As I prepared to leave, Elena asked the question I'd been expecting. "What brought this on, Richard? You've been declining my invitations for years." I considered her question carefully. "I recently had a realignment of priorities, a reminder that purpose doesn't end with retirement." "Or with widowhood," she added gently. Elena had lost her own husband to a stroke 5 years earlier. "Exactly," I agreed. "Margaret always said we should be growing until the day we die." "Wise woman," Elena nodded. "So, shall I put you down for 3 lectures in the fall semester? With appropriate compensation, of course." "Make it 4, I said, surprising myself with my eagerness. "And consider adding a practical demonstration component. Students learn better when they can see principles in action." Elena beamed. "The Richard Winters I know and respect is definitely back." On the drive home, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in months. The conversation with Elena had awakened something in me, a sense of purpose, of forward momentum. I wasn't just Richard Winters, widower and displaced homeowner. I was a physicist, an educator, a man with valuable knowledge to share. When I arrived home, I found Victoria in the garden, kneeling beside the newly planted roses. She looked up as I approached, shielding her eyes from the sun. "They need more water than I expected," she said by way of greeting. "The soil's quite dry." "Margaret always said roses are like people," I replied. "They need consistent attention, not just occasional flooding." Victoria smiled slightly. "Sounds like good relationship advice, too." She was full of wisdom like that. I agreed, kneeling beside her to check the soil. Our shoulders nearly touched, a proximity that would have seemed impossible a week ago. "I've been researching roses," Victoria admitted, showing me her phone with several gardening websites open. These veterans, honor roses need specific care to thrive. You didn't strike me as a gardening enthusiast, I observed, genuinely surprised. I'm not, usually, she said. But, she hesitated, they're important to you, and I realized I know very little about what's important to you. I'd like to change that. The simple sincerity in her voice caught me off guard. I studied her face, noticing for the first time the fatigue lines around her eyes, partially hidden by expertly applied makeup. Why don't we have some iced tea? I suggested. And you can tell me what you've learned about rose care. In the kitchen, as we sipped tea, Victoria's phone buzzed with a text. She checked it and smiled. James says he'll be home early. The property viewing was rescheduled for tomorrow. That's nice, I said. I have news too. I've agreed to give some guest lectures at the university this fall, and I'm still considering the high school position. That's wonderful, Victoria said, sounding genuinely pleased. You must have been an excellent teacher. I had my moments, I admitted, though I doubt my methods would align with modern educational theory. How so? I believed in challenge, in pushing students beyond what they thought possible. I smiled, remembering. My final exam was legendary for its difficulty, but also for how proud students felt when they conquered it. Victoria nodded thoughtfully. That makes sense. Achievement feels hollow without struggle. Exactly, I agreed, surprised by her insight. We lapsed into a comfortable silence, sipping our tea. Finally, Victoria spoke again. Richard, I owe you an apology, not just for the dining room situation, but for how I've treated you since we moved in. I've been so focused on creating the perfect environment that I forgot about the people in it. Apology accepted, I said simply. There's more, she continued. I found something while organizing the study. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, placing it on the table between us. I recognized it immediately. Margaret's engagement ring. I'd been looking for it for months, wanting to give it to James for when the time was right. It was in the drawer of the secretary desk, Victoria explained. In a hidden compartment. I nearly missed it. I opened the box. The modest diamond caught the light, sending tiny rainbows across the tabletop. Margaret had never wanted a large stone, preferring simplicity to ostentation. Thank you, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I've been searching for this. Victoria nodded. I thought it might be important. It was my mother's before it was Margaret's, I explained. I'd hoped to give it to James when he was ready to propose, but by then I couldn't find it. He ended up buying a new ring. The one with the large princess-cut diamond, Victoria said, touching her left hand where her own much larger ring resided. I never knew there was a family ring. Would you have preferred it? I asked, curious. She considered this honestly. Back then? No, she admitted. I wanted new, big, impressive. But now? She looked at the simple ring thoughtfully. There's something powerful about wearing history on your finger. About being part of a lineage of love. We were still sitting there when James arrived home, loosening his tie as he entered the kitchen. What's going on? He asked, sensing the emotional atmosphere. Your father found your grandmother's ring, Victoria explained, slightly altering the truth to protect my dignity. The one that became your mother's engagement ring. James approached slowly, staring at the small diamond. I remember this, he said softly. Mom never took it off, even after her hand swelled from the chemo. She had me tie it to a chain around her neck, I confirmed. Said she'd never be parted from it. The three of us stood in silence, united momentarily by the small circle of gold and diamond that represented so much history, so much love. That evening, we ate dinner together in the dining room, not because it was formal or required, but because it felt right. The conversation flowed naturally, touching on James's work, Victoria's latest project, and my upcoming lectures. I'm thinking of redecorating my home office, Victoria mentioned as we cleared the dishes. Something less corporate, more lived in. What inspired that change? I asked. Your study, she admitted. It's so clearly a space that reflects its owner. The books, the old physics models, the comfortable chair that's seen better days but fits you perfectly. My office feels sterile in comparison. Authenticity over appearance. I quoted our earlier conversation. She nodded. Exactly. Later, as I prepared for bed, I heard a tentative knock at my door. Opening it, I found James standing there looking uncertain. "Dad, do you have a minute?" "Of course," I said, stepping aside to let him in. He sat on the edge of my bed, reminding me of when he was a teenager coming to ask for advice about girls or college applications. "I was wondering if I could borrow Mom's journal," he said. "Just for tonight." I handed it to him without hesitation. "Take all the time you need." "Also," he continued, "I found some boxes in the attic labeled physics demonstrations. Are those from your teaching days?" "Yes," I confirmed, surprised he'd noticed them. "Simple experiments I use to illustrate concepts. Why do you ask?" "I thought you might want them accessible again, with your guest lectures coming up." He smiled slightly. "And selfishly, I'd love to see some of them. I remember how fascinating they were when I was a kid." "I'd like that," I said, touched by his thoughtfulness. "Perhaps this weekend we could go through them together?" "I'd like that too," he said, standing to leave. "Good night, Dad." After he left, I sat on the edge of my bed, contemplating the shifts taking place in our household. They were subtle but significant, like tectonic plates realigning beneath the surface of the earth. The next morning brought another surprise. I came downstairs to find Victoria already in the kitchen, dressed casually in jeans and a simple blouse, an outfit I'd never seen her wear before. "Morning," she greeted me. "I made extra coffee if you'd like some." "Thank you," I said, pouring a cup. "You're dressed differently today." "James and I are viewing that property this morning," she explained. "It needs work, so heels and a suit seemed impractical." "Sensible," I approved. She hesitated, then asked, "Would you like to come with us? See the place? Your perspective would be valuable." The invitation caught me by surprise. "Are you sure?" "Completely," she nodded. "You have decades of experience with home ownership. You'd notice things we might miss." That afternoon, the three of us met the realtor at a Victorian-style home about 15 minutes from mine. It was indeed a project. Beautiful bones but neglected, with peeling paint and a garden overtaken by weeds. The previous owners were elderly and couldn't maintain it properly, the realtor explained as we walked through. But the structure is sound and all the original woodwork is intact. I found myself genuinely impressed with Victoria's questions. She asked about the electrical system, the plumbing, the roof. Practical concerns I wouldn't have expected from someone so focused on aesthetics. In what had once been a formal dining room, Victoria turned to me. "What do you think, Richard? You've been unusually quiet." "I think," I said carefully, "that this house has tremendous potential. Like a diamond in the rough." "But?" James prompted, sensing my hesitation. "But it will require substantial work. Not just cosmetic improvements, but structural updates. It's a commitment." Victoria nodded, looking around the space thoughtfully. "A project we'd tackle together," she said, glancing at James. "As a team." Something in her tone caught my attention. This wasn't just about finding a house. It was about finding a new way to be together. As we explored the upper floors, I found myself in what had clearly been a child's bedroom, with faded circus animals still visible on the peeling wallpaper. James joined me, leaning against the doorframe. "Victoria's been talking about children," he said quietly, "for the first time in our marriage." Really? This was unexpected. Victoria had always struck me as career-focused, with little interest in motherhood. "Mom's journal," James explained. "Victoria read parts of it last night after I did. Something about Mom's reflections on parenthood affected her deeply." I nodded, remembering Margaret's eloquent passages about the transformative power of raising a child. "This room would make a lovely nursery," I observed. "Good morning, Light." "That's what Victoria said too," James smiled. Downstairs, we rejoined Victoria, who was making notes on her phone. "The kitchen needs a complete renovation," she told us, "but it has excellent bones. And that breakfast nook with the bay window is perfect." On the drive home, Victoria scrolled through the photos she'd taken, already planning renovations. "The asking price is reasonable, considering the work needed," she commented. "And it's within our budget, especially if we're strategic about which projects to tackle first." "You seem quite taken with it," I observed. "I am," she admitted. It's nothing like what I thought I wanted. It's not modern or turnkey or impressive in its current state, but I can see what it could become. A metaphor for many things in life, I remarked. That evening, while James and Victoria were discussing renovation budgets at the dining room table, I retreated to my study to review some of my old lecture notes. The familiar equations and diagrams brought back memories of classroom discussions, of young minds grappling with the fundamental laws of the universe. A soft knock at the door interrupted my reverie. Victoria stood there, a tentative smile on her face. "May I come in?" she asked. "Of course," I said, setting aside my notes. She entered, looking around the study with new eyes. "I've never really spent time in here," she admitted. "It's so you." "I'll take that as a compliment," I replied. It was meant as one. She approached my desk, noticing the lecture notes. "Preparing for your university classes?" "Just refreshing my memory," I said. "Physics doesn't change, but teaching methods do." She nodded, then seemed to gather her courage. "Richard, I wanted to ask your advice about something." "Oh? The house we saw today," she began. "I really like it. James does too. But I'm nervous about taking on such a big project." "That's understandable," I said. "Renovation can be stressful." "It's not just the renovation," she admitted. "It's the commitment to something imperfect, to something that needs work." I studied her face, seeing beneath the composed exterior to the vulnerability beneath. "The most worthwhile things often require the most effort," I said gently. "Like marriage," she said quietly. "Exactly like marriage." I agreed. Victoria was silent for a moment, tracing the edge of my desk with her finger. "I read parts of Margaret's journal," she finally said. "James showed me the entries about your early years together, about renovating this house when you first bought it. Those were challenging times," I recalled. "We had limited funds, limited experience, and unlimited disagreements about paint colors." She smiled slightly. "But you worked through it." "We did," I confirmed. "Because the project mattered less than the partnership." Victoria nodded thoughtfully. "That's what's been missing," she said, almost to herself. "The partnership. I've been so focused on the end result that I forgot about the journey." "It's never too late to change course," I offered. "No," she agreed. "It isn't." She straightened, her decision made. "We're going to make an offer on the house tomorrow. Below asking price, with contingencies for the structural issues, but fair." "Sounds sensible," I approved. "And we'd like you to be part of the renovation process," she continued. "Not the labor, of course, but the planning. Your experience would be invaluable." The invitation touched me deeply. "I'd be honored," I said simply. As Victoria turned to leave, she paused at the door. "Richard?" "Yes?" "Thank you for not giving up on us," she said quietly, "for forcing us to see what we were becoming." After she left, I sat in the growing darkness of my study, contemplating the unexpected turn events had taken. When I'd confronted them about their treatment of me in my own home, I'd expected resistance, perhaps even hostility. What I hadn't expected was growth, not just in them, but in myself as well. Margaret's voice seemed to whisper from the pages of her journal. The greatest challenges often yield the most beautiful transformations. And as the evening deepened around me, I felt a profound sense of peace. Not because everything was resolved. There were still details to negotiate, boundaries to establish, adjustments to make, but because we were finally moving in the right direction, with honesty and mutual respect lighting the way. The mansion was still mine, but more importantly, my dignity was mine again too. And somehow, in the process of reclaiming it, I'd helped James and Victoria begin to reclaim something precious in their own relationship. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new conversations, new negotiations. But tonight, in the quiet of my study, surrounded by the books and memories of a life well lived, I felt a quiet certainty that we would face those challenges together, not as adversaries, but as family. 3 months passed in a blink. The roses flourished under our shared care, transforming from tentative transplants to vibrant bushes covered with promising buds. Similarly, the dynamics in our household had evolved. Not perfect, but growing toward something healthier. On this particular morning, I stood in the garden with my coffee, admiring how the veterans' honor roses had established themselves. Their deep red blooms reminded me of Margaret, of promises kept and new ones made. "They're thriving," Victoria said, joining me with her own coffee cup. She'd taken to wearing more casual clothes around the house, a small but significant change that reflected her internal shift toward authenticity. "They are," I agreed. Just in time for the next chapter. Today was moving day. James and Victoria's offer on the Victorian house had been accepted, negotiations completed, and renovation plans carefully drawn up. The moving truck would arrive in an hour. "Nervous?" I asked, noticing the slight tension in her shoulders. "Terrified," she admitted with a small laugh. "It's such a project. Nothing like what I would have chosen 6 months ago." "Growth rarely comes from staying in our comfort zones," I observed. She nodded thoughtfully. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said when we first toured the house, about it being a diamond in the rough. And I realized you weren't just talking about the house," she said, meeting my eyes directly. "You were talking about me, too." The self-awareness in her statement surprised me. "Perhaps," I acknowledged. "I've spent my whole life polishing my exterior," she continued, "making sure everything looked perfect, but I never gave much thought to what was underneath." "And now?" She smiled, a genuine expression that reached her eyes. "Now I'm more interested in substance than surfaces, in building something authentic, even if it's imperfect." James appeared from the house, carrying a box labeled Kitchen Essentials. He set it down near the garden path and joined us. "Final walkthrough with the contractor is scheduled for noon," he told Victoria. "Dad, you're still coming, right?" "Wouldn't miss it," I assured him. Over the past weeks, I'd been heavily involved in their renovation planning. My experience with older homes had proved valuable, and to my surprise, Victoria had been particularly receptive to my suggestions about preserving the character of the Victorian while updating its functionality. "The moving truck should be here any minute," James noted, checking his watch. "Most of our things are already at the storage unit, but there are still a few boxes in the hallway." "I'll help you load them," I offered. As we worked together, I reflected on how much had changed since that confrontation in the dining room 3 months ago. James had found his voice again, no longer automatically deferring to Victoria's preferences. Victoria had discovered depths to herself she hadn't known existed, and I had reclaimed not just my place in my home, but a renewed sense of purpose. The university lectures I'd agreed to give had expanded to a regular guest professor position, 2 days a week. My old demonstration equipment had been refurbished and updated, becoming a hit with a new generation of students. I'd even started a small mentoring program for physics teachers in training, sharing the practical wisdom I'd accumulated over decades in the classroom. "Dad?" James's voice pulled me from my thoughts. "Where do you want us to put the desk from your study?" the movers are asking. "My desk?" I frowned, confused. "Why would you be taking my desk?" James and Victoria exchanged glances. "It's a surprise," Victoria said. "We've been wanting to tell you, but we wanted to wait until everything was finalized." "Tell me what?" James set down the box he was holding. "We've incorporated a space for you in the renovation plans. A study on the first floor, with its own bathroom and a separate entrance. So you can come stay whenever you want, for as long as you want." "Your own place within our place," Victoria added. "No dining room banishment, guaranteed." I was momentarily speechless, genuinely touched by their thoughtfulness. "That's very kind," I managed finally. "It was Victoria's idea," James said proudly. Victoria looked slightly embarrassed. I realized how important it is to maintain connections between generations. Our children, when we have them, should know their grandfather, not just through occasional visits, but as a regular presence in their lives. "Children?" I raised an eyebrow, surprised by this revelation. James grinned. "We're not making any announcements yet, but we're open to the possibility now." As the moving truck pulled into the driveway, I felt an unexpected wave of emotion. Not sadness at their departure, but pride in the journey we'd all taken together. "So," Victoria said, as the movers began loading boxes, "about the desk?" "Take it," I said, making a spontaneous decision. "It would look perfect in that study you're designing, and I've been thinking about getting something new anyway." By noon, most of their possessions had been loaded onto the truck, and we were ready to head to the Victorian for the contractor meeting. Victoria insisted I ride with them rather than taking my own car. "We'll need your expertise," she explained. "The contractor has some questions about the electrical system that I'm not qualified to answer." The Victorian looked different already, even from the outside. The overgrown yard had been cleared, revealing the elegant lines of the house. A dumpster sat in the driveway, filled with debris from the initial demolition phase. The contractor, a no-nonsense woman named Meredith, met us at the door with a clipboard and a measuring tape slung around her neck. "Right on time," she approved. "We've exposed the original hardwood floors in the front parlor. You'll want to see this before we decide on refinishing options." The interior was a controlled chaos of drop cloths, ladders, and exposed walls. But beneath the disorder, I could already see glimpses of what the house would become. Spacious, filled with light, preserving the historical details while accommodating modern needs. "This way," Meredith directed, leading us to what would become the formal living room. We found something interesting behind the drywall. She pointed to an exposed section of wall where workers had carefully removed layers of materials. Revealed beneath was a beautiful stained glass window, long ago covered up by previous renovations. "It's original to the house," Meredith explained. "Based on the style, probably circa 1890. We can restore it, but it will add to the budget." "It's exquisite," Victoria breathed, stepping closer to examine the colorful glass. "We have to restore it." "Agreed," James nodded. "The electrical issues are in the kitchen," Meredith continued, leading us through the house. "The previous owners did some creative wiring that doesn't meet code. We'll need to essentially rewire the entire ground floor." I examined the exposed junction boxes and immediately spotted the problems. "This is dangerous," I confirmed. "It's not just a code issue, it's a fire hazard." "That's what I thought," Meredith nodded. "I've prepared an estimate for the additional work." She handed Victoria a sheet with figures that made her eyes widen momentarily. But to my surprise, Victoria didn't flinch or try to negotiate. "Safety comes first," she said firmly. "Especially since we're planning for children eventually." James smiled at me over Victoria's head, silently acknowledging the change in his wife's priorities. We continued the tour, discussing options for the master bathroom, the potential nursery, and finally the space that would become my study when I visited. "We thought this room would be perfect," James explained as we entered a sunny corner room with windows on 2 walls. "It's private, but connected to the main house, and has that separate entrance so you can come and go as you please." The room had good bones, high ceilings, original crown molding, and enough space for bookshelves, a desk, and a comfortable reading chair. Adjacent was a small but functional bathroom that would need minimal updating. "We want to keep as much of the original character as possible," Victoria told Meredith. "Richard's desk will go against that wall, and we'll need custom bookshelves along this side." I was touched by how much thought they'd put into creating a space for me in their new home. It wasn't an afterthought or a token gesture, but a carefully considered part of their overall plan. "What do you think, Dad?" James asked. "Will it work for extended visits?" "It's perfect," I assured him, "though I hope you know what you're getting into," offering me an open invitation. "We're counting on it," Victoria said with unexpected warmth. "Especially once we start a family. We'll need your wisdom." After the contractor meeting, we grabbed lunch at a small cafe near the Victorian. The conversation flowed easily, touching on renovation timelines, university politics, and James's recent promotion at work. "By the way," Victoria said, reaching into her bag, "I have something for you, Richard." She handed me a small wrapped package. Inside was a brass plaque, elegantly engraved with the words, "The Professor's Study." "For your door," she explained. I thought it would make it official. "Thank you," I said, genuinely moved by the gesture. This means a great deal to me. It's the least we can do, James said. After everything. Everything? I raised an eyebrow. After how we treated you, Victoria clarified, meeting my eyes directly. After how I treated you. I was so focused on appearances, on what I thought success should look like, that I lost sight of what really matters. Which is, I prompted. Connection, she said simply. Respect. Family. James reached across the table and squeezed my hand. If you hadn't stood up for yourself that day, if you hadn't forced us to see what we were doing, we might have lost each other entirely. Not just me, Victoria added quietly. Each other too. We were going through the motions, living separate lives under one roof. I was so busy creating the perfect image that I forgot to nurture the reality. Their words confirmed what I'd suspected but hadn't fully articulated, that my stand for dignity in my own home had catalyzed changes far beyond our living arrangements. It had sparked a deeper transformation in their marriage, in their values, in their vision for the future. Sometimes, I said, thinking of Margaret's journal entries, the greatest gift we can give those we love is the courage to be honest, even when that honesty is uncomfortable. After lunch, we returned to my house, my mansion, as Victoria had once called it, to oversee the final loading of the moving truck. The house felt different already, emptier but somehow more peaceful. My space again, but without the tension that had filled it for months. As the movers secured the last of the furniture, Victoria took a final walk through the rooms that had been theirs. I found her in the master bedroom, standing by the window that overlooked the garden. Having second thoughts? I asked. She shook her head. No, just appreciating the journey. This house taught me a lot about myself, about what I value and why. Houses have a way of doing that, I observed. They're more than just structures. They're witnesses to our lives, our growth, our transformations. I understand now why you couldn't just move to the kitchen when we had guests, she said. It wasn't about stubbornness or tradition. It was about dignity, about belonging in your own space. Yes, I agreed simply. I want to thank you, she continued, for standing your ground, for forcing us to see what we were becoming. You're welcome, I said. Though I didn't do it for you, I did it for me. I know, she smiled. That's what made it so powerful. Downstairs, James was waiting by the front door, keys in hand. Truck's loaded, he announced. We're ready when you are. Victoria joined us, taking one last look around the foyer. It's a beautiful home, Richard. Thank you for sharing it with us, even when we didn't deserve it. Your family, I reminded her. That doesn't change, even when we struggle to get along. The three of us walked outside together. The moving truck was already pulling away, headed for the Victorian where a new chapter would begin. James and Victoria's car was packed with a few personal items they'd kept out for immediate use. Remember, dinner on Sunday, Victoria said as they prepared to leave. I'm trying out that roast recipe of Margaret's. I'll bring wine, I promised. And my lecture notes. I could use your feedback on the quantum mechanics presentation. They drove away with waves and smiles, leaving me standing in my driveway, watching until their car turned the corner and disappeared from view. I felt a curious mixture of emotions, satisfaction, pride, a hint of melancholy, but predominantly peace. Inside, I walked through the rooms that were fully mine again, noting the small marks of their presence that remained. A hook James had installed in the mudroom, a lighter shade of paint where Victoria's artwork had hung. Rather than erasing these traces, I found I wanted to preserve them as reminders of our journey together. In the garden, the roses were catching the afternoon light, their deep red petals luminous against the green foliage. I knelt to deadhead a few spent blooms, making way for new growth, just as Margaret had taught me, just as Victoria had remembered from her grandmother. They're doing well, Bernard commented, joining me unexpectedly. I'd forgotten he was stopping by to drop off some papers related to the educational trust I was establishing. Better than expected, I agreed, standing to greet my old friend. I wasn't talking about the roses, he said with a knowing smile. Though they're lovely too. We sat on the patio chairs, looking out over the garden as the sun began its descent toward evening. Bernard handed me the trust documents but seemed in no hurry to discuss them. "So," he said instead, "how does it feel to have your mansion back to yourself?" "Peaceful," I admitted, "though not as lonely as I'd expected." "Because they're not really gone," he observed, "just relocated, and from what you've told me, in a much healthier way." "Exactly," I nodded. "They've created a place for me in their new home, and I've preserved a place for them in mine, not out of obligation, but out of genuine connection." "A far cry from being banished to the kitchen," Bernard noted. I chuckled. "Indeed, though I must admit, that confrontation was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Standing up to my own son, asserting my rights in my own home, it went against decades of trying to be accommodating, trying to keep the peace. Yet it was exactly what was needed," Bernard pointed out. "Not just for you, but for them as well. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do is establish clear boundaries." "Margaret would have done it months earlier," I said, smiling at the thought. "She never had trouble speaking her mind." "A quality your daughter-in-law seems to have discovered in herself," Bernard observed. "Yes, though tempered now with something she was missing before, consideration for others." I sighed contentedly. It's been quite a transformation to witness. "And to facilitate," Bernard added. "Don't minimize your role in this, Richard. You could have simply moved out, found an apartment, avoided the confrontation entirely. Instead, you chose the harder path, one that ultimately benefited everyone." As the evening deepened around us, we discussed the educational trust I was establishing with part of my retirement savings, a fund to help promising physics students from disadvantaged backgrounds. Another way of extending my teaching legacy beyond the classroom, beyond myself. After Bernard left, I made a simple dinner and ate it in the dining room, not because I needed to assert my right to do so anymore, but because I wanted to. The formality of the setting pleased me, a small ceremony to mark another day well lived. Later in my study, I opened Margaret's journal to one of her final entries. "Life isn't about maintaining what we've built, but about continuing to build even when the original plans no longer serve us. The greatest act of courage is sometimes simply to begin again, to reimagine what might be possible beyond what we've known." Those words seemed especially fitting now. James and Victoria were beginning again in their Victorian project house. I was beginning again with my teaching and mentoring. And our relationship had begun again, too, rebuilt on a foundation of mutual respect rather than unspoken resentments. The mansion was mine, yes, but more importantly, my dignity was mine. My purpose was mine. My future, however many years remained, was mine to shape according to my own values and desires. As I closed the journal and prepared for bed, I felt Margaret's presence keenly, not as a ghost, but as a continuing influence, a voice of wisdom that had shaped not only my life, but now James's and Victoria's as well. Through her journal, through the roses, through the values we'd shared, she remained a part of our story. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities. The university class 1 was teaching, the mentoring program I was developing, Sunday dinner at James and Victoria's new home, planning my study in their Victorian. Life was full again, purposeful again. And it had all begun with a simple refusal to eat in the kitchen when I deserved a place at the dining room table. Sometimes the smallest stands for dignity yield the most profound transformations, not just in how others treat us, but in how we come to see ourselves, as worthy of respect, of consideration, of a place where we truly belong. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.